Hi, my name's John Black. I'm the CEO of Aldebaran Resources. We're an exploration group that specializes in identifying projects that have potential to be very large copper or copper gold deposits. To capture those projects, drill them out, de-risk the projects, and show the potential for them to be a large mine, and then ideally position ourselves to monetize those by selling the project to a major mining company. We effectively replace the exploration divisions of major mining companies. It's a pretty exciting time to be having a business model like this, as copper has just taken off and will continue to take off over the foreseeable future. So it's an outstanding time to put your hands on a great project. And today, I'm sure we'll talk about our ALTAR project in central Argentina. It's a pretty exciting project that we're just getting ready to launch a pretty major drill program on.
Great. John, good to meet you. Thank you for the introduction. This is the first time we've met. You normally sit and speak to Matt, but I'm something different for you today.
Oh, that's great. It's good to catch up. It sounds like we've worked some of the same ground in the past before. So yeah,
and I've bumped into Kevin Heather, the rock doctor, a few times around the bars of Toronto when at PDAC time, but I always end up having a good conversation about the geology when I'm with him.
Great. Excellent.
So, Aldebaran, ALTAR, you've just started drilling. Before we get into the kind of the nuts and bolts of what your kind of 2021-22 program is, can you just give an overview of where the resource is in terms of its kind of evolution and its understanding, the size of the resource, and the deal that you're or the route to you getting 100% of this project?
As I mentioned, we're a group that really kind of specializes in trying to find these large copper to gold deposits. They tend to be porphyries. They don't have to be, but those tend to be the type of project we identify. This is actually the third company within our same management team. Kevin Heather, who you know, and Mark Wayne, our CFO, have worked together on two previous ventures. Our first company was called Antares Minerals, where we had the good fortune to discover a large porphyry in southern Peru, which we sold to First Quantum Minerals for about $650 million. From that, we spun out Regulus Resources to work in Argentina, but identified an exciting opportunity in northern Peru called Antiquary. So from that, we spun out Aldebaran to focus on capturing the ALTAR project. So we're currently working with Regulus Resources on the Antiquary project in Peru, and Aldebaran, which we'll talk about today, where we've put our hands on just an outstanding project called ALTAR. It's a little bit different. Each time when we look to try to find these big copper projects, they can be available in different ways. Sometimes they're held by a company that doesn't know what they have or needs to sell it for some reason. Sometimes there's a little bit of drill data and we see something that a previous operator hasn't seen. What was different about ALTAR was this is a project that at one point was pretty well known. It was drilled out by a company called Peregrine Minerals, another junior company run by Eric Friedland in the early 2000s. They drilled the project out and actually sold the project to Stillwater Mining in 2011 for $487 million US cash at the time. It was drilled out as a large deposit, over 100,000 meters of drilling, two big porphyries that were known at the time. And it was essentially following the same business model that we do: identify a project like this, drill it out, sell it to a major that would be likely to put it into production. However, the project was never a good match for Stillwater Mining. Stillwater was a platinum producer with a mine in Montana. Their shareholders were not terribly interested in having a large earlier stage copper development opportunity in South America, and it just stalled in Stillwater. So quite a number of us who are always scouting for these opportunities started to pester Stillwater to see if we could acquire the project. They had paid quite a lot for it. They put quite a bit of additional money into it. In addition to the nearly $500 million they paid for it, they spent almost $50 million in additional work on the project. They were interested in disposing of the asset, but not at a price that was attractive to those of us taking a look at. But the key break on this is that Stillwater was acquired by Sibanye Gold in 2018 to now become Sibanye Stillwater. And when that happened, Sibanye determined it was a non-core asset. It wasn't something they were interested in moving forward themselves. And they let all of us that were taking a look at the project submit indicative offers to see if we could come to an agreement. And the offer we made to them resonated with them to move forward. And so we have an agreement that will allow us to earn up to an 80% interest in the project. And we can do so by The first step was paying US $15 million, which has been paid to Sibanye Stillwater. We're now in a period of 5 years in which we need to expend complete $30 million worth of exploration expenditures on the project to earn 60% interest in the project. We've spent about 17 million, a little over 17 million to date. So we're well on track. We have 3 more full field seasons to complete that. So we're well on that pathway. And then in addition to the 20% interest that Sibanye will keep in the project, they also have a 19.9% equity position in Aldebaran. So the advantage to Sibanye Stillwater was they didn't receive the cash they put into the project previously on it. But they do have participation in the project through direct interest in the project and also in an equity interest in Aldebaran Resources. Then there's one final step that we can go to an additional 20% to get to an 80% interest in the project by completing an additional $25 million worth of expenditures. So it's a classic earn-in for us to go forward, and really a partnership with Sibanye Stillwater. And this fits extremely well with the battery metals initiative they have to gain further exposure into metals that are critical for electrification that we'll see throughout the world in the coming years.
Okay, thank you. That's really useful history for me. It's filled in some gaps in my knowledge. The one question I've got was have you done a capital raise since 2018, and did they maintain their interest at 19.9?
Yes, they do. They have pro rata rights, and it's important for me to mention also that we have one other large shareholder called Route One. It's a hedge fund out of San Francisco who've backed all of our enterprises over the years. They own nearly 50% of the company. So between the two major shareholders, we have nearly 70% of the company held in two hands, both with pro rata rights and both very keen on moving the project forward. They've participated in every raise that we've done.
And so it's effectively controlled by these two major shareholders in the sense that you've got a relatively small free float.
Absolutely, yes. That's the good description of us, yes.
Okay, interesting. The first word that comes to mind when you do any research about altar is arsenopyrite or arsenic. When I looked at the project, you've got Altar Central, you've got Altar East, you've got new discoveries at QDM and radio, and you've got epithermal gold potential, and you've got Supergene stuff. It's a complex suite of assets with the arsenic in the main bulk of the porphyry. You've got 1.2 billion tons of rock, of which there's a certain proportion of arsenic in there. Now, when you look at the valuation of Aldebaran, it's only $70 million, and yet you've got 280 million tons of supergene mineralization. You've got 500,000 or 400,000 ounces of gold in the epithermal, and it's relative to the complexity of the situation, yet the mineral potential. It doesn't seem as if the market is rewarding you as a company for the assets you've got. So my question, I guess, is how are you communicating the arsenic issue to investors and to the free float and to kind of the market in general, and how does that fit into the bigger picture and your plans going forward?
Okay, a couple of themes in there that we can touch on it, but let's hit directly on the arsenic. This project, when it was held originally by Peregrine Metals, and then when Stillwater acquired the project, it was known in the market to be a very large deposit. They actually bulked it out even more than we do and took it to over 2 billion tons. But when they bulked it out at that size, it became low grade, and it had arsenic associated with it. And they just assigned an average arsenic grade to the entire deposit. Despite all the drilling that was done, one of the things that surprised us when we took a look at this was there was a lot of work done by just setting up and drilling the deposit out, but fundamental data sets like surface geologic maps or geophysical data sets or careful logging of the core hadn't really been completed. So a lot of what we did over the first 2 years in the joint venture was just collect those basic data sets. And that allowed us earlier this year to recast the resource. So we actually presented the resource as a smaller, still very large, as you mentioned, over 1.2 billion tons and indicated, and another 200.2 billion tons in inferred. but that's about half the size of what it originally was projected at. But it brings it to a more typical grade that we'd see for a porphyry like this in the Andes. And more importantly, what it allowed us to do with an improved geologic model was to better constrain where the arsenic occurs. There is arsenic in the deposit. It tends to be up high in the deposit. And previous efforts blended it throughout the entire deposit. So we see distinct zones where it is. And by using geologic constraints, we're better able to estimate the grade and the distribution of the arsenic. And so we've shown it to be less of a problem than it was originally envisioned. And it's very much restricted to the upper parts of the deposit, including the zones that have supergene enrichment. So it opens up possibilities. For example, we could consider SXEW heap leaching of that supergene zone, which when you use SXEW heap leaching, you produce copper cathode on site, and the arsenic isn't an issue because you're not producing a concentrate where your arsenic reports to. And so we can see we don't have a definitive pathway forward yet. We're still gathering the information on this, but we can see ways to manage around that. We're also understanding a lot more about arsenic in the world, particularly helped by a number of major companies that are monitoring us and providing us with information just to understand what the markets are for arsenic, how it can be blended, how it could be handled with less costly ways than having to put treatment on site. So there's a lot being learned about it right now. We think it's a much more manageable, but the fundamental key to this is understanding it, to put in that good geologic work. And that's where Kevin, Heather, and the team come in really strongly on this. And I'd make reference to several of the videos we have on our website where Kevin walks through the rationale for collecting the big data sets we do and why we do this. It means it's been kind of quiet. We're a little bit off the map, and I don't think the market fully realizes what we have in hand and what we potentially have, but I think we'll unlock that in the next few months here.
Thank you. Again, it's really useful information for me. The arsenic, is it in arsenopyrite? And when you're in the sulfide, when you're in the fresh rock, does that not separate out? Can't you float it away from the chalcopyrite and produce a clean copper con? It's
actually in a porphyry system like this, it's energite or other sulfur salts. So it's not arsenopyrite that we have.
Okay.
And so it's a little bit different in the sense that you do have copper tied up with the sulfur salt minerals. So you don't want to float it away because you lose the copper with it. So, right. But much of it's oxidized in the supergene zone in the top part of the deposit. The energite has been oxidized, and so now we see scorodite or other oxide arsenic minerals which don't report to your con. So
and also don't report to the leach if you're putting it into a SXEW plant.
Correct. Yes.
And the depth, exactly. the oxidation depth is. Does it vary? I mean, when you on your secondary mineralization, have you got? I noticed that you had some primary chalcocite, which is pretty impressive. But do you have secondary kind of high supergene chalcocite? Have you got a kind of an enrichment blanket at the base of oxidation?
At the base of it's kind of a classic secondary enrichment zone. So we have up to 100 meters, a little more in places of completely leached material, an oxide cap over the top of it. And then we have a secondary zone, which is primarily secondary copper sulfides. It's not too much oxide in there, but the secondary sulfides do leach. So that opens up that possibility for us to explore. And the depth of oxidation varies a little bit. There are fault blocks that move it around a little bit, and each zone is slightly different.
And in the technical report that came out in March, in the mineral resource update, it says it recommended that you continue with heap leach studies. Is that part of the, and I think in one of your videos, you were kind of putting a question mark that you might go on and study these things. What are the gating factors for you to say, yes, we do want to study this? So, sorry, maybe not a heap leach, but I can't remember, but the supergene mineralization, what are the gating factors on you saying we're going to study this as a standalone?
Well, it brings up an interesting point just on our overall strategy. We've really talked about the existing resource, which occurs in 3 zones. It's 2 large porphyry systems. Like many porphyry deposits, this is actually a cluster of porphyries. And so the bulk of the resources and all of the copper resources we report occur in the Altar Central and Altar East deposits, the 2 big porphyries we have right now. And then we have a small gold resource out in QDM to the west. But we have other zones that have been identified that we think have potential to be perhaps even more interesting than what we already know about. So what we're really focusing on, and as the start of this program, is a new zone called Radio, which is out closer and beneath the QDM zone. And there we see very clean mineralization with no arsenic and quite elevated gold contents and some of our best hypogene grades to date. So we're very much interested in drilling that out and understanding. It'll be a third major center of copper gold mineralization that we have. And we want to understand that. What we're really trying to do is understand the entire district, the entire system, before we focus in on just one. We don't know that we see the best part or the starting point on the project yet. And so we want to know more about all of these zones. We'll progress with questions like metallurgy on both the primary and the secondary mineralization. But we won't determine what the best pathway forward on the project is until we see the full picture.
Great. And when you talk about the radio porphyry, last year one of your best holes was hole 42, which I think was into the radio porphyry. When I couldn't just, can you just remind me when that was done? You know, was it quite late in the program that hole came through? Yeah,
it's the last hole we've reported. And as I mentioned, the project was known as a very large but lower grade porphyry system when it was drilled out by Peregrine and held by Stillwater. But as Stillwater kind of quietly did exploration work on this in the period of about 2014 to about 2017, it was a project that didn't fit with them. It was kind of an albatross to them in some ways, but they were continuing to do work. The drill results from that work were not publicly reported. It was not deemed to be a material project for them. But we began to hear about it as you've worked in South America. You know how we all as geos get together and have beer nights once a month or something like that. And oftentimes those are accompanied with a presentation about a project that somebody's working on. And the people who we knew well that were working at Altar started presenting some exciting new drill results that they had from the project. And they didn't fit this idea of very, very low grade deposit. They were announcing runs of 100 meters of over 1% copper equivalent. And those type things started to catch our eye. And that's why we took a look at the deposit. So the reason that we entered into this joint venture, I think it could be justified just on the large deposit that's known right now. But what we're particularly interested in is the remaining exploration potential. And so we saw the first few holes that Stillwater had drilled into what they called the QDM radio zone, and drilling beneath the QDM gold deposit and hitting the radio porphyry underneath. And they had some pretty good indications that there were higher than normal grades in there, different style of mineralization, very clean, very gold rich copper mineralization. And we followed up on that while we were putting together these big data sets. And 42 was a step out from a previous hole 34 that had hit some pretty good mineralization in there. And it demonstrated we had size potential and we had that grade potential. Hole 42 has an inner zone of 111 meters of 1.4% copper equivalent within a much broader zone of very nice grade as well. And so that opens up the potential for a brand new zone of significant volume. The grades offer the potential for it to be either open pit if we get enough of it, or to go bulk underground on it as well. And so we very much want to know what this zone is about. And we've just launched our first really aggressive drill program. Our work to date has been basic data compilation and understanding of the system with a little bit of orientation drilling to get our hands around things. But this will be the first field season that we drill hard, and a lot of that focus will be on that radio zone, just because we think it has potential to emerge as one of the better parts of the overall district, perhaps the starting point for the district.
I think it's Kevin who's done the geology of QDM 42. He did a talk through of that hole, and I think hole 21 as well, 219. Sorry, he described that you had the radio porphyry here, and then there's a fault, and next to it, but deeper, is the QDM porphyry below the QDM gold deposit, and they seem to be close, separated by a fault, possibly two different systems, possibly the same. Lots of questions, lots of kind of conjecture around the origin of that mineralization. They looked quite narrow and pencily. Do you feel that there's the opportunity to kind of bulk those out laterally to add tons to those, to kind of give a bit more lateral heft to those to that kind of that unit, or perhaps it's just a scale thing that what looks skinny isn't actually in real life?
One of the things that is unusual about Altar, particularly for the neighborhood we're in, there are quite a number of porphyry deposits, and on both sides of the Chilean-Argentine border where we're at. And but the majority of them in the southern part of San Juan Province where we're at are copper or copper moly deposits, more typical Andean copper porphyry systems. But Altar, for some reason, has an unusually high gold content to it. It's more akin to the copper gold systems we're seeing, say, up at Filo or Jose Maria in the northern end of the province and up into the Maracunga belt. And one of the things that we see commonly on these more gold-rich copper systems is they tend to have a high vertical aspect ratio. They're pencil or pencil-like deposits. And so that is a challenge on the deposits, but they do have much better grades. A classic district to take a look at is the Cadia district in southeastern Australia, where they have these pencil-like systems. Once you're onto them, they're very good grades. They're a little bit hard to find because they're vertical and you're often drilling vertical holes into them, but we're fortunate now that we have one. As far as whether QDM and radio are the same porphyry or not, we will learn a lot about that as we drill more extensively. The QDM copper gold zone is right beneath a gold only system on the surface and was found by drilling beneath that and moving from a more of an epithermal gold system into a more typical copper gold porphyry system. There's a fault that separates that from the radio zone, but they're in a mining sense, they're the same, they're contiguous across that boundary. We don't know yet. They do appear to be different pulses, but we don't know if they're significantly different in age or not. So it's more of a geologic curiosity detail for us as geologists. In a mining sense, it's really kind of the same body as we know it right now. But we don't have a lot of holes into this yet. It's going to be fun to drill it out. I would point out that these copper gold systems, there are other ones. Like if you take a look at the system that GT Gold discovered in Western Canada recently and sold to Newmont. Very similar geometry on that, where you get these cores where you have these higher grade copper gold, and then you have a lower grade cloud around them. The classic one, which I'm sure you're quite familiar with, would be Cascabel in northern Ecuador, where it's also a fairly vertical system on that, but with grades that support bulk underground mining. And so you have that great high grade core to it, and then you have a lot of material. And it depends what cutoff you use, how much volume you pick up around the outer margins. And
I don't want to get too geologically techie, but are you seeing kind of different magma rock geochemistry? Is this a more alkaline system than perhaps the alkalic systems in Alta and Central and East, or are you seeing that shift in the rock geochemistry?
We're just really getting into that with some help of some researchers, and some of the Argentine universities have some students helping us take a look at this. But what we suspect in this system is that we're more oxidized than normal. It's still a calc-alkaline system. We're not alkalic or anything like that on it, but probably verging a little bit in that direction. And that's a tendency we see overall in the Andes. So it fits kind of the typical more gold-rich system that we see in other segments. It's, for some reason, this one is the southernmost of these in this part of the Andes.
Really interesting. You said that you're going to do this next season is your biggest drilling program. Can you outline roughly in terms of dollars, meters, and kind of where the thrust of that effort goes into? Is it kind of QDM porphyry, QDM and radio in terms of meters? And there are also some other new targets you'll be testing in the area as well, I believe. So just kind of quantums, please.
I'll give the high level of this. I'd make reference to a video that Kevin's put out that Laura's helped him put together recently. It's on our website, where he goes into more detail on the rationale and the strategy behind the drilling. But they're really, we'll be drilling with 4 rigs. We currently have 2 turning, and another one should show up next week. And the fourth one will be here probably just on the other side of the holidays on it. It's as an aside, it's really hard to get rigs in Argentina right now. There's just, San Juan is going to be just a fun place this summer. A lot of activity with other pretty exciting projects around us. Our drilling will really have 3 principal focuses. The main emphasis will be on completing the drill out of the radio or radio QDM system. So we want to get enough drilling in that we can report an initial resource. Our current resource has nothing that's reported on the copper gold side from radio or radio QDM. We just didn't have enough drilling in that to calculate a resource when we did the resource last year or earlier this year. So we want to get enough drilling in that to be able to give the first indication of what we have. So that'll be the focus of our drilling over the next 6 months or so. But then we also have two other styles of drilling. Go ahead.
Sorry. Do you know roughly how many meters you're kind of allocating mentally for that? Is it 10,000 meters, 5,000, 15?
We'll be drilling with 4 rigs. We typically get an average of about 1,800, 900 to 1,000 meters per rig. And we've been able to extend our field season significantly here. Traditionally, the field season for drilling on this project has really been kind of January to April. And it's not so much the conditions on the projects, it is that we had to go through 2 high mountain passes to get to the project, and those were often blocked with snow. This year, a major change for us is that Glencore, who has the Pachon project 25 kilometers to our south, cut in a new low elevation road to their project. And that eliminated 1 pass, and then we completed another segment to eliminate the second pass. So we anticipate, as I mentioned, we already started drilling. We started drilling around the 1st of November this year, and we anticipate we'll be able to drill through May or maybe even June of this year. So with that number of rigs, we have the capacity to drill in the order of, say, 25,000 meters of drilling this coming season, which is a significant jump for us on the project.
So it's 1,000 meters per rig per month, or 900?
Let's call it 900 per month. It depends, probably more on the quality of the drillers than anything else right now. It's a project that does drill relatively well compared to some projects. And so that's a pretty reasonable number to use. Yeah.
So that'll be with 4 rigs, that's between 3,500 and 4,000 meters per month. Correct. And are you going to put all 4 rigs on how are you going to tackle radio QDM? Are you going to put 2 rigs on, and then 1 rig on the pit and 1 rig on new targets?
As I mentioned, there are two other priorities we have on this. We're the known zones at east and central right now, particularly at depth. We see high grade cores there. They bulk out to these bigger sort of average grade deposits. But we see these high grade cores that we'd like to understand more. They're open in several directions. So we'll be looking for extensions of the higher grade portions of the 2 known big deposits right now. And then we also, through the compilation and the acquisition of all these data sets we have, we've seen some entirely new, completely untested zones jump out in the data sets. And we want to get the first holes into some of those as well. We believe there's potential for completely undiscovered porphyry centers still to be found. So we'll probably mix the rigs. It gets a little tight over in radio to have all 4 rigs in the same place. And it'll be nice to balance out and test some of these other areas. Kevin goes through, the one missing piece of data we have on the project is a deep 3D IP survey that we're completing. We've completed over about a half of the deposit, including the radio area. We want to complete that over the eastern half of the known areas of mineralization early in January and February, and we'll probably wait to get that data before we do more of the drilling off on the east side of the district.
Okay, so you'll truck on with 2 rigs, maybe put a third on radio and QDM. And then once you've got the 3D geophysics to help you just finalize the location for the new targets and for the high grade extensions in central and east, then you'll allocate rig to each of those.
Correct. Yes. Mm-hmm.
And if are you funded for this? I mean, so what's your cash position, and what's your drill cost per meter, kind of all in? 25,000 meters, 6 months.
We launched the drill program in November with about $7 million in treasury, so we're in pretty good shape cash-wise that way. Drilling costs are a little bit high in Argentina. All-in cost, probably $400 a meter is a good number to use on a project like this. That includes assays and all the all the things that are related to drilling.
The full number,
And we do have some other activities on environmental baseline studies and metallurgical work and stuff that are going on. So to drill hard all the way through next June, we will need to raise some additional capital at some point. but we're not in an urgent position to do that right now. And we do believe that not a lot of people know about this project yet. And so we kind of like to get the word out on what we're doing, have people see what's happening on the project, maybe table some of the first results before we go to market on that. But at some point, we're likely to raise some additional cash and try to accelerate the project as it moves forward.
Yeah, I mean, just the simple maths of $400 per meter and 25,000 meters takes you to 10 million, and you've got 7. So that's quite clear. But all you need is a banger of a drill hole. You just come on, John. All we need is 1,000 meters at 1% copper and 1 gram gold.
There we go. It's interesting what the market expects out of these projects these days, and we've had. I'm sure you followed Filo to the north of us, where they've just banged out some smoker holes up there on it, and so these projects, we obviously can benefit from our own work, from people just being more aware of where we're at on this project. But as our neighbors are doing work as well, I think you'll see a tremendous amount of reporting coming out from San Juan in Argentina right now. We heard the other day the estimates that there'll be over 40 rigs turning this field season between ourselves and other projects in our neighborhood, and a lot of drill information coming out. And it's refreshing that Argentina over the decades has been a little bit more complicated country to work in at times. And but I think now, as we're all kind of scouring around trying to find these big porphyries, and they're harder to find, there are not too many of them left in the world, and the projections of copper usage means that we really have to accelerate our game on putting new mines into production on this. And there are quite a number of good copper plays in Argentina. Argentina has an opportunity to turn into a major copper producer. And the San Juan government, and even at the national level, are really getting onto this. So you'll see in the coming months that they'll be launching initiatives to encourage mining in Argentina, encourage major foreign investment. Some of the projects in our neighborhood are a bit more advanced than us, and I think you'll see announcements that they're moving forward. And it creates a very exciting environment to be working in, and draws eyes into the project so we can see. And when you look at that, you can see some of our competitors have fantastic deposits and great valuations. But if you take a look at leverage, it's a good idea to spot a group like ourselves. It's a little bit off the map, but sitting on a great asset. So the potential for us to increase percentage-wise, I would argue, is greater than some of the more well-known projects that have already had a pretty good run.
Absolutely, yeah. No, everyone's looking for the undiscovered gem. Specifically on Argentina, I've publicly been cautious about it over the years. It's really encouraging to see that some of the provinces are more favorable to mining, and I understand that there's a federal law that can be interpreted at the local level. What specifically should we look for as kind of affirmation that San Juan is taking things seriously? Is it fiscal stability agreement with a developer? Is it a mining permit? What can we, as a general public, hang our hat on to say, oh no, San Juan are not just making the right noises, but actually making concrete steps? Is there anything that you can see coming up that could give viewers confidence in San Juan Province in Argentina?
Well, I think that as a first indication, just the level of activity, as I mentioned, there's just going to be a tremendous amount of drilling in the area. Ones to watch really for the two more advanced projects that are in the province at the moment are Filo and Jose Maria, both Lundin companies that hold those projects in the north. And particularly the Jose Maria project is moving along pretty well on their permitting. And they've just announced they're constructing an all-season road into that project, and watch to see what the government does to help them increase or improve the timeline towards that coming into development. They've made some concessions to allow them to recover the cost for the road to come in against early production royalties, which is a fantastic move forward. But if we start to see their advanced permits being approved, if we start to see tax stability agreements on that, the type of agreements that mean the government really wants to have that project into production. We know they do. They're saying all of that. It's nice to see it come in concrete moves like that. Yeah. And I believe what we'll see is some of the initiatives that the government's talking about now is even putting out public licitations for major infrastructure development in the country. There's some discussion about encouraging foreign investment to improve railway access out to the East Coast, which would have importance not just for mining, but for agriculture and everything else. Somehow to move commodities out to open water to be able to get those to other places in the world are pretty important. We've recently seen it's not directly mining related, but we've recently seen Fortescue announce a green hydrogen project in the southern part of the country, the windy part of the country, so they can use wind power to generate production of hydrogen. And they're talking about potentially as much as an $8 billion investment for that. So those type of announcements, whether they're mining related or infrastructure related or just large foreign investment in the country, are all great news for us. The fiscal challenges Argentina's had over the years have sometimes made people hesitant to make foreign investment, particularly in large amounts, into the country. And I think we're seeing a shift in that right now. So any projects that are announced in that sense will just encourage people to move forward.
Great. Well, I will certainly look out for those telltale signs, because I mean, it seems as if it's on the move, but any corroboration will be really useful. And Argentina is very much a sleeping giant. That it'd be great to see a minerals industry, advance from where it is in the country and thrive and flourish. One last question, if I may. Your gold area, is that? Yes. Are you going to do any work on that? Is that aside? Is that a bit of a distraction when you're looking for these big copper gold porphyries? Have you got a plan for that, or is it just you're going to park that for now and just see how you get on with the deeper exploration?
We're certainly well aware of it. It's between indicated and inferred, it's almost 600,000 ounces, and it is open for expansion. It's sub-gram, it's just a little bit less than a gram, and it's predominantly sulfide mineralization. So it's not immediate clear that you could heap leach it, which would be the advantage to a project of that size. So we view it as a small add-on to the real prizes that we're looking at are much bigger and more significant, but we're well aware of it. We kind of laugh if we had that as a separate project, it would almost justify our current market cap right now. But we'll spend some time, but it won't be a major priority. As we're drilling for QDM radio copper gold mineralization at depth, we complete additional we have to drill through that zone, and sometimes so it will be adding more information, and we'll probably, there's a chance we'll increase the size of it, but it's not particularly high priority, not that because it's not interesting, it's just overall relatively small compared to the big project.
Yeah, great. And I said that was my last question, but actually water. What's the water situation at Altar, and how is that going to develop as time goes on? It
is something that we'll be putting more priority into this year to understand, and I'm sure all of our neighbors are doing so as well. We're in the central Andes, so it's high and dry there. There's not a lot of water that falls. There is capture of water on the east side. The west side, the Chilean side of the Andes, tends to be much more dry. And on the east side, we see in a number of the basins, large water reservoirs in those basins. But there is competition for that water too, between ourselves and other mining groups, and there's agricultural use downstream. So they're very conscious of that water. So I think we'll all be investigating where the water occurs and how you can secure water sources as well. And eventually, I'm certain there will be some discussions about whether large dams are necessary in the area, or some way to capture water so you don't lose it when it comes off in the wetter part of the year and it just runs out to sea. There'd be ways to store that water, which would be a benefit not just to the mining, but it'd be a benefit for possible hydroelectric generation and smoothing out the water availability for agricultural uses downstream. So, but that's getting into when you're developing a project and how you're moving forward, and perhaps interaction with government on doing things like that. But we'll begin to take a look at that this year as we move into more feasibility type level activities. At the same time, we're still drilling the deposits out.
And the existing mines in the area, what's their water situation like? Is that a critical item? Is that something that really is a gating issue for development or not?
Not clear yet, but it's a fair assumption anywhere in the Andes to assume that water is a critical factor on this. So, and there's not a lot that's published on individual projects yet. That's something that we all kind of keep quiet. It's a bit competitive on that right now. So the work's going on. Some of the more advanced projects like NGX or Filo, you'll start to see mention of where they're securing water sources for.
Good. John, thank you very much. What have I missed? Is there anything else that you feel the urge to communicate?
No, I don't think so. It's just for those investors that are bullish on copper, which I think it's a very good thing to be bullish on right now. Going forward, keep an eye on San Juan Province overall. There's going to be a lot of exciting news coming out from ourselves and a number of other interesting projects being drilled around on us. And when you do that, take a look at the projects themselves and see not just which projects look more interesting grade-wise or size-wise, but particularly the ones that maybe haven't really come to limelight yet. And I would say Aldebaran is a classic one where not a lot of people know about the project yet. We've been pretty quiet as we've done fundamental work on the project to get it set up. And as we put out a much more steady news flow of drill results this year and it comes to people's attention, I think there's a lot more leverage on a group like ourselves moving forward. So it's a great time to take a look at us before we start pounding out a lot of good drill results in the next few months.
When do you and Kevin decide on which horse you're going to ride? At what point do you say we're going with Regulus or we're going with Aldebaran, or do you kind of co-jockey both horses?
This is kind of who's your favorite child question here. So we manage both groups together. It was never our intention really to have two companies at once, but once we identify these opportunities are not common and they're increasingly difficult. Over the last couple of decades, you've seen a number of big porphyries drilled out by juniors and sold to majors. Ross Beatty's Lumina Copper Group's a master at it. They've done it 6 or 8 times. But it's harder for us to find these now. We're just kind of cleaning the shelves on these. And so when the opportunity to acquire Altar came up, we jumped on it, and it made most sense to separate it into 2 companies because there are those that really like Peru or those that really like Argentina. A valid question was, does that stretch our team too much? But what we did is we were able to increase the size of our management team by putting on additional people to cover it. And I'm comfortable that we're in a good position to manage both companies. Each one is a different setting, different challenges with it, but we have plenty of depth. We also benefit. We've been doing this for about 20 years in the Andes now, and we have outstanding local teams in both countries. So it's not dependent entirely on us doing. We're not sitting the rigs and doing everything ourselves. So we can depend on good staff on the ground to move these projects forward. And most of that staff have been through one of these exercises already and seen what it takes to drill a project out, what it takes to gather the information that's of interest to a major company. A lot of us focus on great drill holes or lots of tons or lots of in situ pounds. But if someone is to acquire a project from you, they're focused on metallurgy, water. A lot of the questions you're asking right now, can this be made into a mine? And that's a lot of the work that needs to be done on projects like this, and our team's experienced at doing that and in a good position to move them forward.
Let's see if the market trusts you on that, because if you get good technical results in the next 12 months or the next drilling season, the next 6 months, and the share price doesn't kind of close that gap on some of those peers, it may be that the market is effectively saying we want management solely focused on one project, but that's months ahead, and that may not be the silver bullet. But that I'm sure that's a conversation that you have internally on a regular basis. John, thank you very much. It's been really interesting. Let's leave it there. I look forward to speaking to you again when you come back with that director's hole, should we say, and getting the update then.
Okay, great. Fantastic, Merlin. It's a pleasure to meet you, and then look forward to talking more about the project in the next few months here.